Hey everybody, Ben here from Cineblog Studios, and this week I want to talk about 5 of my acrylic paintings over the past few years that were inspired by video games. Stick around. Now we've all got different inspirations. I obviously do, as well as I know you guys do. But one of the ones that has been consistent over and over again has been the games that I play. And when I'm talking about paintings that were inspired by video games, I'm not talking about fan art. I do fan art separately, and those pieces I specifically don't sell because that's a whole legal ramification thing that I don't even want to get into, so anything that's specifically fan art has kind of been excluded from this list. What I have done, though, is gone back over the course of the past 5 years and found 5 of sort of my more favorite pieces that I just really enjoyed working on, or just ones that are really more directly or perhaps even more indirectly inspired by games. And the point of all of this is really just to show that inspiration can really come from anywhere, and just because you see something or are inspired by it doesn't mean you're directly copying it. And of course, as we go, if you've played any of these games or just really are inspired by them, go ahead and hit that like button as we go. So the first piece is called Dystopia Propaganda, also sometimes referred to as Support the Resistance or the Dystopian Project. This one actually has a much longer making of video here on the channel, but I wanted to highlight it specifically because it's a little bit different than a lot of my regular stuff. So again, Dystopian Propaganda, this one is mixed media on stretched canvas, 20 by 20, and I did this back in 2015. Now, this particular piece, again, it's very different than a lot of stuff I normally do, and it was inspired by the games BioShock and BioShock 2, which are set underwater, and there's a lot of old, sort of rotting posters on the walls, advertisements, stuff like that. And I wanted to, rather than take a large scoping landscape the way I normally do with a lot of my pieces, I wanted to kind of dive in further and find one particular thing in a world that perhaps people see every day. So you have Support the Resistance scratched onto a piece of newspaper that's burnt and worn and like really just aged up quite a bit. Super fun project to work on. Not the most successful project, I think. I honestly think the text should have been a little bit larger. But, you know, I know for next time. But so much of this piece was just about the process and getting the paper to look old and weathered and burning the edges of it, which was really fun. In addition to painting just with acrylic mediums to make it look and actually feel like bricks. If you actually were to rub your hand across the piece, you could feel the texture on it, which is really, really cool. Next up, we've got another piece that, again, obviously inspired by a game. But this time is a little more interesting because it's actually not a game I've ever played. The piece is called Searching for Answers. It's a 12 by 24 acrylic on canvas piece from 2014. This particular piece was inspired by the game Journey, which is, at least currently, only available as a PlayStation Store download. And I don't own a PlayStation, so it's like, all right, how do you know this game? What's funny about this is an earlier piece of mine from, I believe it was 2012. Called The Wasteland. I had done, and then a friend of mine sent me a message and said, hey, this reminds me of this game Journey. Is this what it's inspired by? I'm like, no, I've never heard of the game. And he's like, wow, that's just a funny coincidence. So I looked it up. He actually sent me a Let's Play of it, which is a 4-part Let's Play that I'm going to link in the description box below because it's really nice to watch, great narration. If you're going to watch any playthrough of a video game, it's a very good one to go for, and it's actually a relatively short game. So once I had seen that, I kind of was really started to get inspired by the game. I eventually picked up the art book for it. Just the design and the style and the mood of the whole game and the big sweeping open landscapes. Again, obviously it's because it's me, it's something I'm very inspired by. The piece in particular, I really wanted to focus on a desert, but I want it to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more daylight, which is what you see in the very beginning of the game. So there's some structures sort of pushing and sand pushing up against them. A few not so great foreground rocks on the right hand side. And then we have a figure with a staff, that's something you're going to see in my work from time to time. And then rather than giving it a cloak like I did in my 2012 piece, I decided to give it sort of a long flowing red scarf, the same way you'd your character has in the game. Of course, in the game, it's more of like a red and an orange. But again, it's a little bit of a divergent. Again, to not necessarily make fan art, but make something again inspired by the game. Next up, we're going to jump ahead to 2016, Forest of the Blind, 18 by 24 on a piece of recycled plywood. This piece is mostly only inspired by the title. The title in this course, Forest of the Blind, is in reference to one of my favorite games I think it came out in 2015, but I played in 2016, and that was Ori and the Blind Forest. Incredible game. Really awesome. I highly recommend picking that up. It's on Xbox as well as PC if you're interested in that. But this was a really fun piece to work on. One, because I didn't paint this in the studio. I painted this live at a gallery opening show, and that was really fun to do. So the whole piece, I think I might have had a little bit of a base layer done, but outside of that, everything from the texture of the trees to the rocks, all of that, was all done live over the course of about, I think 4-ish hours. So really, really fun. I think I did a little bit of finishing work back in the studio, but everything was done right on the gallery floor. At this point, I kind of, because I was live and I was pushing back to, I just need techniques that are easier, so I leaned back a little bit on a lot of the Tim Galliard stuff with doing this sort of that multicolored tree branches and all that stuff in the background there, just to kind of give the illusion of just trees going way back. But of course I pushed the light a little bit differently, trying to kind of focus a path sort of down the center, and really fun to work on. So again, the title, Forest of the Blind, comes from Ori and the Blind Forest. Not necessarily fan art. The game's actually, in a lot of places in that game, it's a very dark, almost night mood for a lot of the game, and this is obviously very bright, so not a direct correlation to the game, but inspired in the title and in sort of just wandering through a nice, wonderful forest. Next up, we have a piece from March of 2018, so newer still. This piece is called Searching in the Deep. It is another 18 by 24, but it is back to acrylic on canvas, as I usually do. This particular piece was inspired by, at the time, March of 2018, I was just getting into and playing a lot The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That game has sucked up a lot of my time since I first picked it up. The first, I think, 2 months, I probably put at least 120 hours into that game. A lot, like it was like every day for like 3 hours. Boom, 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 boom. Really exploring the world. Absolutely love that game. We'll still go back and wander around, even though I've completed it all the way through, at least for the most part. And yet I'm still kind of finding little secrets here and there, which is what's great about a game like that. This particular piece, I actually don't think is super successful on my part. There's a lot of empty space, which I mean is par for the course comparison to the game, but I think I could have done a little bit more to maybe hide in some secret things, maybe something on the walls, caves, just something else to make this a little bit more interesting. But the idea was to really kind of push this idea of this cliff drop-off, which I think I really kind of was successful with, and my contrast and the way the shadows work are really nice too, but not necessarily my best execution in terms of overall composition. Plus, I had recently finished, again, another piece called It Wells Up From Within. There's a PPV on the channel for that one, where I did a big tree. And for that big tree, I did a different and sort of new technique. It's what I've sort of now adopted into doing for a lot of my larger trees, which is building up the color out of a lot of different colors of browns to kind of mimic the bark a little bit more. I don't really do that a lot, but on a much larger scale. So that was really the point of this piece. And then I decided to put the figures up on top of one of those sort of big stumps. Like, wouldn't it be great if they were stumps rather than just big trees? So that's kind of what I went with. I think in my original concept sketch, they were just big giant rocks, the way a lot of things in my pieces are. But I think making it trees made it just a little bit more interesting in that way. Again, I'm not super happy with the piece, but I can't really complain. It turned out pretty good, and I got some really nice blends, especially in the up towards the background with a lot of those browns. I really kind of pushed that a little bit more. What's funny about the title of this piece, Searching in the Deep, for whatever reason, the Adele song Rolling in the Deep was stuck in my head while I was working on it, so that's where the title of this piece came from. But yeah, it was, as always, it was a fun piece to work on. Don't feel like it's one of my best, but, inspired by a video game nonetheless. Alright, so the final piece is another Zelda-inspired piece, but we actually are going back both in the time that I made the piece as well as in which game in the series that it was inspired by. This is 2016's Home of the Water Guardians. I was thinking back to some video I watched about sort of redesigning video game environments. And this is sort of, I think, the piece that sort of kicked off this idea of really kind of doing video game specific inspired pieces. Even though, like the Journey one, that I was doing it earlier, but not so much intentionally as I was doing it with this piece. Now this particular one's a bit smaller. It's about 5.5 inches by 12 inches on a piece of poplar wood, but it's, again, acrylic as always. And this particular piece was inspired by The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, specifically the Zora's River. In that game, you're kind of weaving through a little bit of a block maze, because that whole game is very blocky, considering its age. But you're sort of weaving around, there's the river going through, and eventually you reach the waterfall, Zora's Waterfall. And in front of Zora's Waterfall are all these crisscross slopes. So I wanted to do something like that. I wanted to do a slope or something in front of a waterfall, but I wanted to dial it back, because there's like 4 or 5 intersecting ones in the game, and I'm like, that's be a little too busy, I think, for the scope of a painting. So I decided to just take it down to 1, cut it across, and leave it at that. What I really was happy with this piece, is one of my intentions too, was to mimic the colors of the game as much as I could. So I wanted to kind of focus really on those cool grays for the rocks, and sort of these nice sort of patchy yellow-green areas for sort of foliage and stuff growing up around everything. And as one little sort of last homage to the game, I decided to toss in a figure with a sword and shield, just to kind of give it just that little extra of an edge to it. So again, this is a good piece that's very directly inspired by a game or a part of a game, but it's not supposed to be fan art. It is that space, but it's reimagined, it's reinvented. It's not Zora's Waterfall, it's the Home of the Water Guardians. So those are 5 of some of my recent pieces inspired by video games. There are more. I've done several more. Most recently is a piece called Floating Oasis, which was inspired by Zelda Skyward Sword. You can check the PPV for that over here. And as always, be sure to subscribe. This has been from Cinderblock Studios. Like, support on Patreon, all other stuff I forgot. Follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys next time.